Good evening. Good to see so many people here to learn about the fascinating civilization of the Aztecs. By the way, is the microphone working? You can hear okay at the back? Good. Let's go back to 1519 AD. Anyone know what happened in that year? Right. Hernán Cortés landed on that part of Central America that is today known as Mexico. He expected to find gold, and he did. What he did not expect to find, however, was the great Aztec civilization. Aztec legend said they originated in the plains of northwestern Mexico and slowly migrated southward. When they arrived at Lake Texcoco in 1325, they founded their great capital, Tenochtitlan, on the site of what is now Mexico City. The Aztecs developed a complex society and governmental structure, at the head of which was the emperor. They made many scientific advances, especially in the areas of astronomy and medicine. They also had a complicated religion, and interest in the arts, agriculture, and social conditions occupied much of their time. Let's talk about their remarkable achievements in some of these areas. You cannot do much if you don't have food to eat, so let's first take a look at their farming practices. The land that the Aztecs farmed was not fertile enough to grow enough food to support the growing population, so they were forced to invent methods to increase productivity, including irrigation, fertilizer, and even building terraces on hills to protect soil from running off, like we see today in China, the Philippines, and many other parts of the world. But one thing we don't see was their very original idea of chinapas, spelt C-H-I-N-A-P-A-S. Chinapas were floating gardens built on swamps. Actually, they were quite simple to make. First, canals were dug through the marshes and swamps. Then, mud from the canals was placed on mats woven from weeds and straw. These mats were quite big, maybe 5 or 6 meters long and 2 across. Trees were then planted in the bed of the swamp at the corners of each mat. The trees took root, and the chinapas were held firmly in place. The Aztecs used these floating gardens to plant their maize, corn, and also vegetables like beans, chili peppers, avocados, squash, and tomatoes. The Aztecs were very advanced in some ways, but they didn't use animals or plows to help them work the land. In fact, they didn't even have the wheel. No problem. The soil on the chinapas was soft enough that pointed sticks were all they needed to plant crops on them. But the Aztecs were much more than imaginative gardeners. They made great advances in the sciences, especially astronomy. I'm sure many of you have heard of the Aztecs' calendar stone. It took them 52 years, from 1427 to 1479, to build the calendar stone. It was huge, a massive piece of rock 3 feet thick, 12 feet in diameter, and weighing about 24 tons, on which they carved pictographs for the days and months of the Aztec calendar. This showed just how advanced the Aztecs were in the science of astronomy. It makes me think of the clean air they enjoyed in those days, when they could see all the stars shining so brightly in the night sky. They would have had a big problem doing this in most parts of the world nowadays. But back to the calendar stone. It had 18 months, each of 20 days, namely 360 days made 1 year. But they had long before worked out that there are 365 days in a year. So they added 5 days, which they called the Nemontemi, or sacrificial days, to get 365. Remember, this was 103 years before the Gregorian calendar that we use today. Very sophisticated, those Aztec astronomers. And they were not only clever astronomers. The Aztecs made great advances in medicine. At the time, many Europeans looked down on the herbal medicine of the Aztecs as a heathen practice, just like they used to look down on traditional Chinese or African medicine. But in fact, Aztec doctors could do more than even the best doctors in Europe. Their medicine was primarily based on spiritual healing and herbal healing. Spiritual because they believed many illnesses were caused by such things as an angry god or bad birth signs. So their first step in treating an illness was always prayer and sometimes animal sacrifice. But they also used herbal medicine and concentrated much of their medical science on finding out what herbs could do, just like the ancient Chinese doctors. So, over generations, the Aztecs accumulated a vast knowledge of the herbs in the world around them and the medicinal properties of each one. One difference with traditional Chinese medicine is that the Aztecs concentrated more on curing the symptoms of a disease than getting at the cause of the disease. They felt that if a god or goddess wished to make them ill, then they could do nothing about the root cause, namely a god. If the medicine worked, it meant that the gods approved of the patient getting well again.
Who is it?
It's me, Sally.
The door's open. Hi.
Hi. So have you decided where to go for your big holiday?
Finally, I narrowed it down to Southeast Asia or India and Pakistan and decided on the Southeast Asia.
Southeast Asia. Wow, sounds romantic. Decided when you'll leave?
I have to be back in time for the new term, so I want to leave by July 1st.
That's a long trip. 3 months nearly. Don't you think it's too long?
No, I want to do research on recycling while I'm there for my environmental studies course next year. So I've got tons of things to do. I don't know where to start.
First things first. Passport, air ticket, and money. How much money are you taking? I hear it's not cheap like it used to be.
The passport's okay for another 2 years. I'll go to the travel agent tomorrow, and I reckon £3,000 should be plenty. I'm glad I kept doing that horrible waitress job this past 3 years.
1,000 a month. Sounds plenty. Including airfare?
No, Dad's got a frequent flyer award, so I should be able to get to Singapore and back for nothing.
Yeah, but you have to be careful. Normally, those free ticket things mean you can only fly when there are empty seats. Don't want you to get stuck there until all the rich Asian students have flown back here after seeing their families.
I'll manage, but I'll see what the travel agent has to say. Gosh, July 1st. That's only a bit over 3 weeks.
Inoculations. All sorts of nasty diseases in those tropical places. Have you checked out the health requirements?
Didn't think of it. How do I start?
I think there's a Ministry of Health webpage that tells you what injections and pills you need before you go to different countries. Yellow fever, malaria, that sort of stuff. How many countries do you plan on visiting?
As many as I can. Singapore, Malaysia. I'd like to get to Sabah and Sarawak in East Malaysia if I can. Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, and Indonesia for sure.
That's pretty ambitious. How do you plan to get around?
As cheap as I can. Don't fancy flying much. Maybe I can get a boat from Singapore to Borneo.
You didn't mention Borneo.
Oh, that's the big island where Sabah and Sarawak are. Most of it belongs to Indonesia.
Oh, I know. And Brunei, right? That little place with tons of oil.
Right.
Have you still got your camera?
Yeah, and Dave has promised me a digital video camera for my birthday.
But your birthday isn't until late July.
An early birthday present. That's what brothers are for.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Richard Smethers from International Students Consulting. And welcome to today's talk on what you need to know and think about prior to going to study in the UK. Probably the biggest question is that of housing. It can be very expensive, especially in London. And the halls of residence in most universities are certainly not cheap. That's what you pay for convenience. Probably the best thing for most of you, I believe it's the first time any of you have studied in the UK, is to try to find a vacancy in a coop house with other students. If you are keen to make maximum progress with your English, I would suggest that you try to find accommodation with at least one native speaker. So many foreign students end up living only with people from their own country, and I've actually known cases where their English is worse after 3 years than when they arrived. One advantage of living with British students is that they'll probably have experience of dealing with landlords, looking after the bills, and other things that might be done quite differently in your home country. So how to find shared housing? Any housing? Arrive early. It's best to try and be in the town or city where you'll be studying at least a week before the start of term. If you leave it too late, you'll be competing with thousands of other students all looking for a place to live. And one of your first stops should be the housing office. They have a database of all types of off-campus accommodation, and the early bird catches the worm, as they say. You'll probably meet other students at there in the same boat you are. And chat with people. If you meet any that seem to be the type of people you could get along with, then you might well sort out your accommodation quite quickly with them. Now, I know that a few of you will be going with your sponsors. Sharing a house or a flat with other students is probably not what most of you would prefer. If you are trying to save money, a studio flat, which has a bedroom and living room combined, and a place to cook, is usually cheaper than a flat with a separate bedroom and a kitchen. But remember, you will probably need somewhere to study at home. Once you have found a place to live, there are a few things you should check out very carefully with the landlord or the estate agent. Quite a few estate agents look after the renting out of housing for one or several landlords. First, how are you going to pay the rent? By the way, I forgot to mention that you should open a bank account very soon after you arrive. You might want to open a savings account for the bulk of your money and keep some in a current account for paying the bills. The advantage of the former is that you get more interest on your deposit, but you usually can't write checks or arrange to pay such things as electricity, gas, telephone, and water bills, plus what you owe the landlord. These are normally paid on a monthly or quarterly basis with what are called direct debits and standing orders. The rent, of course, is usually paid monthly, and most landlords want a deposit of 1 or 2 months' rent to pay for any damage you might do. Accidents happen, and it's sad but true that there are thieves everywhere. Make sure you have good locks on your doors and windows, and insist that the landlord or estate agent changes them if they are not up to scratch. You should take out insurance for major items such as personal computers. If you have a car, then insurance is required by law. And if you think you may want to get a car, make sure you take your current driving license with you, because it may help you get cheaper car insurance. But the most important type of insurance you should take out is medical insurance. Falling off your bike and breaking your arm can be a very costly business if you are not protected by insurance. Unlike the Student Union Advisory Service in your university, I am not allowed to offer you the best advice on what insurance company to use. Now, what about working? If you have a student visa for longer than 6 months, you can work for up to 20 hours per week during term time or 40 hours per week otherwise without applying for permission from the Home Office. And if you have a UK visa based on a relationship to someone with a long-term visa in the UK, you will normally be free to take up any sort of employment in the UK.